In today's episode, we are diving deep into observability with none other than Adriana Villela, an expert in the space and OpenTelemetry contributor. We'll break down what observability really means, why being able to buy shoes fast is a perfect metaphor for reliability, and how SREs can avoid burnout while keeping systems up and running. Plus, we'll explore the impact of AI in incident management and how OpenTelemetry is transforming observability. If you've ever had a VP tell you just restart the database during an incident, or if you are looking for ways to make on-call life a little bit more sane, this one is for you. Let's get into it. Adriana, you help companies achieve reliability greatness through observability. Can you define this term and what key practices do you recommend?
So specifically observability or reliability?
Let's start with observability and then, how this comes into reliability greatness.
Okay, that sounds good. So I think in the last several years, there have been a lot of definitions of observability thrown around. And the one that I've landed on most recently that I really like, and it was coined by my friend Hazel Weekly, who I think was a guest on this show already, if I'm not mistaken.
Nice.
Observability is the ability to ask meaningful questions, get useful answers, and to be able to act on that information. And I think it's such a great definition because who doesn't want to be able to understand our systems better? And I think that observability is a key aspect to reliability. I don't think we can talk about reliability without observability coming into play. It has to be a part of the reliability practice. And in terms of reliability, I would say a system is reliable when it's behaving in the way that we expect it to behave, right? So like you're buying shoes online and you're adding your favorite pair of shoes to your shopping cart. So you hit add to cart and it takes, 10 seconds to add to cart. Yes, it is working, but you're probably pissed off because it's taken 10 seconds to add those shoes to your shopping cart because your expectation, and I think we all have that expectation now in the world of online retail that things happen like this, right? So it should not take 10 seconds. It should probably take less than 1 second or whatever, like fast feedback. And I think that's what reliability is. Yes, it's behaving as it should in terms of adding those shoes to cart, but is it behaving the way I expect it? No, it's not. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind in terms of having those reliable systems.
I want my shoes fast. That's going to be the title of this podcast.
I want my shoes fast. Yeah, there you go.
I like actually that the definition include the term, I think it was act or react or, basically like, okay, I observed, I saw what's happening, now what, right?
Exactly.
Right, like data and observing results. If you don't know what you can do after that, it's completely useless and meaningless. So having this ability to act on that is key. So you have an SRE manager background, and this podcast is a lot about reliability and incident management. What critical element do you see as part of an effective incident management strategy?
First and foremost, psychological safety. And, I'll tell you a story actually from being on this, managing this SRE team. There was this, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I think there's something that got messed up with the configuration somewhere, as these things happen, that someone on my team had accidentally made a change. And then, of course, I had everyone yelling at me, see what happened? Someone else what happened? And then, of course, that panic, the stress that they're throwing upon me, I unfortunately threw on my team. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what happened? And the person who was the team lead for my team, so my second in command, messages me on Slack. And he goes, you're not creating a psychologically safe environment. And at first I'm like, how dare he? And then when I thought about it, I'm like, oh, damn, he is absolutely right. I hated that he told me this, but he was absolutely right. And it stayed with me ever since. Because I think when it's raining upon you, when all the hellfire is raining upon you as a manager, one of your jobs as a manager is to protect your team, and especially an SRE team, which is probably coming more under fire than any other team. So it becomes really stressful, right? I mean, if you've ever been on like incident calls, there's always like the VP who's like, well, you should restart the database, because once upon a time I was a developer, and you're like, shut up and let us do our jobs. So really providing that psychological safety for your SREs to like do their jobs, right? Because nothing's more annoying than like someone being like, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Have you figured out what the problem is? It's like, dude, it'll be done when it gets done. We all see the priority in this. So let's make sure that we take that stress away. And then of course, like I think having those postmortems to understand like what happened, so that we can avoid it. But as part of creating that psychological safety, we've talked about blameless postmortems, and I mean, at the end of the day is like, stop pointing fingers at people and making them feel crappier than they already do at the end of the day, for having made a boo-boo, because, we're human, we make mistakes. I remember once, fortunately, this was a test environment, but I truncated a bunch of database tables in a test environment right after we had just pumped through a bunch of data through like an ETL process. That was not fun. I did not feel great about that. It was fortunately not prod, but imagine like some poor person does this by accident in prod, and hopefully there's a backup of the data. But you don't need that extra stress. Like the person who messed up knows that they messed up. Let's just work towards like fixing it and making sure that it doesn't happen again, and not adding to their stress and not making them cry more for their mistake. I think is really the moral of the story.
Therefore, we've heard from community members who have large SRE teams that oftentimes they will have someone dedicated to just communication. And that, and the coin a VP comes in is often used as, once upon a time. And these people may think that they know the system and what's going on because they used to be practitioner, but the system has evolved and that's no longer the case. And most of the time they want to help, but they are not really helping. One tips, we have a roundtable. We do this every few months. One tip that someone gave us is that you should give a task to the VP so that they are getting busy, doing this task and not bothering the team. So go do this, and the VP is like, yeah, I'm going to help, right? And so that was a good tip.
That is such a great tip. Yeah.
I mean, I was an SRE also back in the days, so I can relate to everything that you shared. You actually talk about the fact that some engineers are getting like PTSD type of symptom from on-call incidents. Do you want to speak a little bit about this? What can be prevented to avoid this?
Yeah, so I think being on call is stressful as it is, right? Because that you can get called at any point during your call shift for something that has gone kaboom in the system. So, first of all, there's the stress of that. So I think we have to be sensitive to that. That a call shift is not a regular shift. It's a shift with anticipation of maybe something bad might happen. And then there's the other aspect of like when things go kaboom in the system and being woken up in the middle of the night, because of course these things love to rear their ugly heads in the middle of the night, and being woken up when something bad is happening. And even though that you're on call and this might happen, you might have been in a deep sleep and your brain isn't functioning properly. Like I myself have never been on call, but as you said, I have managed an SRE team before. And guess what? Managing an SRE team, it means that I am the point of escalation if you can't get a hold of my SREs. And that happened to me one night. I'm like sleeping. My phone's usually on vibrate when I sleep, and I can sleep right through it. But like this one night, I'm like hearing this buzz. I'm like, What's going on? It didn't even like register because I'd never gotten called for this before. And I'm like, why are people from work calling me? And at first I'm like, and then I answered the phone and this poor dude who's like trying to figure out who to contact. He's like, yeah, I can't get anyone else on your team. And then I'm like groggy trying to figure out like, get to my office downstairs, go on Slack. And I'm like, try to call people. And it was kind of nerve wracking because my primary on-call person was not reachable, which is why they called me. And then I'm like trying to reach other people. And finally I got a hold of somebody. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God someone picked up, because, I was in my position, I was removed enough from things that I didn't know, like I wouldn't be able to fix it if push came to shove. So I needed to find somebody who could fix the thing. Interestingly enough, one of the people that I did call who I don't think they ended up picking up at the time, but I guess eventually had gotten woken up by the call, charged time to like the call overtime because their sleep had been disrupted by my call, which is like, at the time I'm like, this is irritating that they're doing that. They didn't even end up working, but like I disrupted their sleep in doing so. Even though it ended up like, because he was like, I think the backup of the backup of the backup. So I was like calling everyone. So just for that disruption, waking him up. So on-call PTSD, yeah, I mean, it's the anxiety, the anticipation. And I think most people don't last as SREs for very long because of that, because like there's only so much you can take. I honestly think like, I don't think I could be an SRE right now because my thought is I'm too old for this. I seriously don't think I'd be so crabby if you tried to wake me up in the middle of the night over something. I don't have the fortitude for that sort of thing. And I've been, even though I've not been on call myself, I have been part of like software releases that have gone wrong. So I know all the emotions that go along with trying to fix incidents in prod. I might not have been woken up by an incident in prod, but I've had to like rush to fix incidents in prod, sometimes during business hours, of course, on a Friday afternoon, just before everyone's supposed to go home. So it's stressful. It's stressful, and it takes its mental toll. It heightens your anxiety and being sensitive to the fact that this can cause a mental toll on most normal human beings. I think that's super important. It can be tricky. Like I had someone on my SRE team who did not want to be on call, and we arranged it because the others on the team didn't mind being on call and he did mind so much. We arranged it so that his call schedule was a lot lighter than that of the others because the others weren't bothered by it. But that was an agreement that we made as a team to be able to accommodate someone. And I think that's what you can do. A certain point, also knowing that it's a prerequisite of the job, I think at a certain point, maybe you need to kind of reevaluate and see if it makes sense for you to continue as an SRE. Just from a mental health standpoint, that's something else. But trying to be accommodating as much as possible if you can.
Yeah, I guess it depends also of the compensation format, right? If you are getting paid for the on-call, generally it's well paid, so it can be financially interesting. But as you say, if it's part of your base comp and you are getting the same amount out of it, I see how it could be unfair for the other member of the team. Switching gears, you are a great OpenTelemetry contributor. OpenTelemetry is super hot. It's actually the second highest in number of contribution in the CNCF. And right behind Kubernetes, which is like extremely impressive.
I know, right?
So, right, it's crazy, yes. So how do you see OpenTelemetry transforming observability?
So I think the way that OpenTelemetry has transformed observability has been in providing a standardized way to instrument your code. Because before OpenTelemetry, I think there had been an attempt to already consolidate on standards. There was the Open Tracing project, and from the CNCF, which was archived, and then the Open Census project from Google, which has also been archived. And these two projects actually merged to form OpenTelemetry. So OpenTelemetry is this realization that, like, let's stop trying to compete with each other and let's just, all come together under one umbrella. And really it took, I think, a lot of the burdens off of the vendors as well to maintain their own libraries around instrumentation. And because it's vendor neutral, it means you should be able to switch from one vendor to another if you're instrumenting your code in OpenTelemetry. There's obviously like some nuances around switching, but at least it means you don't have to re-instrument your code, which is a huge relief, because instrumenting code, I mean, you're writing code. It's like writing comments. It's, like writing print statements, like, log statements, whatever. It's code. So to like switch from one instrumentation library to another, all of a sudden is a pain in the butt and introduces new technical debt. So I think that's a huge, huge win for OpenTelemetry, because it's really provided that standard. And because, and I think one of the reasons why it has such, why it's the second largest project of the CNCF in terms of contributions is because a lot of these observability vendors, a lot of the major ones, have come together and to basically say, hey, let's work on this thing together. So, I work with people in OpenTelemetry on a regular basis who are quote unquote competitors, but it doesn't feel like it because we're all working towards the common goal. Is OpenTelemetry perfect? No. Of course not. Is software done? No. I do want to address the fact also, like, every once in a while you'll hear like someone dissing on OpenTelemetry, and it's like, fine, diss on OpenTelemetry, but if you're going to complain about it, please come help make it better, right? Like, don't complain and then say, well, my product does it better. It's like, oh my God, dude, you're like defeating the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. It's not like, here, write your own instrumentation thing. It's like, let's all instrument in OpenTelemetry, make it better, make it more standardized, and then let your product do what it does best, which is like take that information and do something useful with it. Because that's all we want, right? With our telemetry data. It goes back to that definition, right? Can you ask useful questions and get the answers that you need and then do something with that information? And I think that is where the differentiation comes with the various observability vendors, where it's democratized, right? We're democratizing the information being ingested. What differentiates you is what you're doing with that information that makes it useful to me as the consumer. And, to SREs who are ultimately going to be like going through these traces and metrics and logs and going, what the hell is happening right now? Please point me in the right direction so I can go back to sleep.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the fact that you say all these vendors are contributing, I mean, the number of contribution might be one of the most important metric, right, for this project, because at the end of the day, they're open source, community led, and that, I think that reflects also the stickiness. And if you have a crowd behind a project, it's less likely to die, but more likely to improve. So that's a really cool achievement that the OpenTelemetry community has done here. So when it comes to teams that are either looking to adopt OpenTelemetry, do you have any tips on how the tool can improve their reliability?
I think in order for OpenTelemetry to help improve your reliability, I think there has to be first a willingness and an understanding of the importance of instrumenting your code. And this is where it can become tricky, right? Because oftentimes when an SRE is looking through stuff to try to figure out what happened during an incident, yes, they're looking through application metrics and whatnot, and they're looking through logs, but I think also making sure that you're looking through traces. And I think traces are, I feel like they're the unsung hero of observability, because they kind of stitch everything together, right? They help tell the story. It's like your journey starts here. When I click, the add to cart for my shoe store, my online shoe store, these are all the steps that happened in order to add it to the cart. So when we have our database slowdown, the distributed tracing will show you, like, we got here. This is the spot where we made that database call. And this is where we noticed that the call to this database took, 10 seconds longer than it ought to, kind of thing. But that is only made possible if you're instrumenting your code with traces. But who instruments traces? Usually the software developers, right? And convincing your developers to instrument the code and even to add metrics and logs to your application as well. Because yes, you can. There's like logs and metrics that you can get from other sources, but also like from your application, instrumenting all of that stuff together, convincing them to instrument the code so that others can benefit from that instrumentation, I think is really important. And I think this is where convincing that everyone in the organization that observability really is a team sport is important. They want to know what's in it for them, right? Well, what's in it for them is if you instrument your own code, then you too can use observability tool to figure out what's going on when you're debugging your code locally. When you instrument your code, you can use it as a quality gate for your QAs so that when they're testing, they're doing exploratory tests or whatever, they can look at the telemetry emitted by your code and say, hey, I found a bug, this is why. Or they can say, I found a bug, I don't know why you're missing instrumentation. And then this will help those developers instrument the code better so that by the time it gets to the SREs, now they hopefully have enough information to be able to do that meaningful troubleshooting of the code when, shit hits the fan in production and things go caca. So everyone sort of ends up playing their part, but also benefits from it because that instrumentation allows them to do their job better. But then it has that downstream effect to the SREs who are like, yay, developers, thank you so much for instrumenting this. And I also want to mention that it is not the job of the SRE or the observability team or whatever you want to call to instrument an application developer's code, because an SRE, why are you asking an SRE to instrument someone else's code? They didn't write the code, right? Would you tell the SRE, hey, can you write comments for my code? Can you write my unit test for me? You have no idea what my code does, but I think you'll do a great job because I don't feel like doing it. And that's not cool. Like you're just going to get crap at the end of the day. And just as like not instrumenting your code properly will prevent you from getting those insights into your application, instrumenting your code, having like the wrong kind of instrumentation can also affect the reliability of your system. And even when you think about it, like, SREs rely heavily on SLOs. SLOs are derived from SLIs. SLIs are derived from metrics. You don't have good metrics because you haven't instrumented your code properly. Then you can't come up with a good set of SLIs and then subsequently a set of SLOs. And it's those SLO triggered alerts that will cause you to probably as an SRE go and say, something's up with the system. Let's go see where it is. And they can't pinpoint it to like a specific metric. And then that metric's not correlated to a trace. Then they'll just see an alert go off and go, I don't know where to get started. But if you have those correlations.
Some companies that are preaching the DevOps principle, even though now they're kind of losing steam in terms of popularity, but a lot of organizations were encouraging developers to be more in the operation world by actually putting them in the on-call rotation. Often it was during the day, but developer would be on call. And so they would have to experience, this switching gear with AI ops gaining traction. How do you see like generative AI having an impact on observability?
I think, I really see AI as like a buddy, your observability buddy. I don't think AI is going to be directing you anytime soon, whether it's for observability or incident response. But I think AI is very well suited for identifying patterns and saying, hey, this looks interesting. This is a different pattern than we've been observing last week. Maybe you want to take a look. But I think it's still up to the discretion of the human to determine whether or not this is, legitimate, because maybe it was a spike for some other, perfectly normal reason that, the AI wouldn't necessarily be attuned to. I think it can save us from a lot of, extra work, right? By just pointing us in the right direction. Because I think that's that's like one complaint that I heard a lot at one of my previous jobs where I was running an observability practices team. And the engineers that I work with, they're like, fine, they instrumented their code and they go into the observability backend and go, okay, and now what? They didn't know where to start, right? And I think it's valuable to have something telling them where to start. Hey, buddy, you might want to look over here because this looks a little bit interesting. And I think that can be a huge help to anybody, really.
Rootly just started a Rootly AI lab where fellows are basically experimenting with generative AI to see how can it helps with incident management and system operation. And one cool little project the team worked on is a tool that will help you understand if a dip or a spike of traffic is caused by an event or it's an outage. Let me explain a little bit what it is. When I was at LinkedIn, one day the CEO came in, opened the door, and like, "Yeah, traffic is down, revenues are down. What's going on? It must be an outage." So we're all scrambling, trying to see if there is an outage somewhere that we didn't see, why traffic is down and revenues are down. And turns out it was a major holiday in India, and we didn't know about it. So we developed the Rootly AI developed a small tool where you can say, "Hey, I have like this traffic pattern," and it can tell you, "Hey, maybe it's related to I don't know, like Super Bowl or lunar holiday or whatever, some other part of the world where you cannot know everything that's happening, or TV show or whatever it is." So I think, as you say, LLM has this ability to augment us, right? And right, digest data at a level and have like a broader knowledge that the human brain can contain. So definitely like the AI buddy, right? Term that you call it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that is worth mentioning is I think AI can also be good at, not just saying, "Hey, you might want to look here," but also like suggest some courses of action because, maybe it's something you hadn't thought of, or maybe it's like a slightly different take on what you would have thought of. And I wonder too, like it could be kind of cool to like through a series of prompts, sort of like go back and forth and brainstorm with the AI on like possible courses of action. I could see that as like being really a really useful application as well. But yeah, as you said, being able to distinguish between different types of incidents so that we don't take them all at face value, like so that you can panic when it's time to panic, essentially.
So Adriana, you are really involved in diversity and inclusion efforts. Can you speak a little bit about your work and the type of impact that you are looking at having?
I guess my main area right now is so I have a podcast, Geeking Out. It started out so previous to Geeking Out, I had this podcast with my former coworker Ana Margarita Medina, and it was called On Call Me Maybe, and it was a great title, and we had lots of fun recording it. And then after we were told we couldn't continue with the podcast anymore, I was like, I spent, I think, a couple weeks crying. Then I thought, I want to start my own podcast. I'm going to do it. I think the initial format was going to be like, oh, it's just going to be a continuation of On Call Me Maybe. And then I'm like, well, I kind of want to make it a little bit different as well. And by sort of happy accident, maybe subconsciously, I guess, I've really prioritized, and I think this might be Anna's influence, really prioritized on making sure I got guests on there who were from underrepresented groups in tech. Because as I've come to realize, like I've been in tech for, it'll be 24 years this year. And most of my career in tech, I spent kind of under this bubble, not meeting too many ladies in tech. And it was only once I started going to the open source world, and interestingly enough, it really broadened my horizons. I'm like, oh my God, there's like so many other women in tech and so many other like underrepresented groups. And you start working in open source and you're like working with people from all around the globe, different continents, et cetera. And makes you realize like not everyone is who works in tech is a guy. Not everyone who works in tech is from North America or the States. Everyone assumes I'm American. They're like, oh, you're Canadian? Yes, we also exist in Canada. So it's like broadened my horizons, and I'm like, oh my God, I really want my podcast to like, I want it to be tech focused, but I want it to elevate underrepresented voices in tech. I want it to be a combination of like, yes, some well-known folks in tech. My most famous guest on my podcast was Kelsey Hightower, which was honestly a highlight of my career to have him on my podcast. But, having big names like that, I've had Kelsey Hightower, I've had Charity Majors and Liz Fong Jones, but I also want to introduce folks to like the not so well-known names in tech as well, and to really introduce people to like, women in tech that they wouldn't have necessarily encountered. And, it's been so cool, like getting to, sometimes I'll like meet people at conferences. I'm like, oh my God, I want you on my podcast. You have a really interesting story to tell. And it's happened a couple of times. And that's been like, for me, super, super inspiring to be able to tell their stories. And I think also being on stage and giving talks is, I guess, a diversity effort in itself. Because the more, I think I never really took stock in this. I never put so much importance to this until more recent years, where people have told me like it's important to see yourself out there. And it's true. Like when I see people who look like me out there, it inspires me to do awesome things. And I want to be able to inspire other people to do awesome things as well. And to prove like, yes, there are, like, we are out there. Come join, come inspire other people. One of the guests on my podcast said that one of the reasons why she started doing talks is because she wanted to show other women that, yes, you can go out there and give tech talks, and then that in turn empowers other women. And it turns out that she had actually empowered another guest on my podcast, which is wild. I'm like, oh my God, these, two people who I didn't even know each other. Turns out they knew each other, and one was empowered by the other, and it was incredible. And then, me meeting all these great people. I introduce, whenever someone's like, hey, I'm looking for someone to do blah. I'm looking for someone who would be a great guest on a podcast or a live stream or to review proposals. I love to be able to give opportunities to people who are just getting their start. I think it's so important to pay it forward, because my philosophy is like, someone along the line, so many times along my career, there were multiple someones who gave me a chance. And I want to be able to like repay that kindness and help someone else along their career and do whatever I can to help elevate their voice. So I think just continuing to talk, to do my podcast, to participate in webinars, to share other people's talents, I think, with the world is what I continue to do.
Amazing. And we need diversity more than ever. It was already much needed as software has had such a powerful impact on our society. But I think now with AI, which is seen perhaps as, a drastic economic revolution where it's going to drive so much stuff, like we need more than ever diverse group of technical folks who can shape technology that's fair and takes all that we need to make it, the best it can. Adriana, if listener wants to contact you, where can they find you online?
Okay, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Blue Sky, on Instagram as well. I have, it's a combination of tech stuff and rock climbing videos. I am a boulderer. I love climbing. The best place to find me, if you go to bento.me, bento.me / Adriana Villela. Yeah. So it's ADRIANA, M as in Mary, and then V as in Victor, ILLELA. That's a link to all of my socials all in one place. Yeah. So that is the best place to find me. And you'll get the links to my socials, to my blog, to my podcast, all in one go.
So on bento or on a climbing wall are the two places where you can.
Yes, bento and the climbing wall.
Adriana, thanks you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a hoot.